समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया.
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
आप समझा.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
In the aftermath of Operation Sindoor, Indian government has launched a multi-party delegation to several countries to explain India's stand on terrorism, the attack on Pahalgam, and its response. Now, this move has attracted attention from several quarters, and understandably. If India believes in strategic autonomy, why does India need to do it? If we find fault with Western narratives in the media, why do we need to explain ourselves, and to whom? Why do we expect from this rather expensive capital hopping across the world, all on taxpayers' money? And finally, how does all that connect to India's larger strategy to counter and isolate Pakistan? To unpack many of these questions and to understand the nuances, I am joined by two distinguished career bureaucrats, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar and Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. Both the gentlemen have had long, distinguished careers in the Foreign Service and have held key positions across the diplomatic spectrum. So, without further ado, I welcome them to WorldView with Swasti. Let's dive in. So what a pleasure it is to be joined by both of you in studio. Thanks for taking the time out. And as you know that we are discussing the aftermath of Operation Sindoor. It has been pretty much a turning point in, at least in the recent, so to say, geopolitics and India's place in the world, and also India's stand on terrorism. But as I was mentioning that, the government has now dispatched multi-party delegations to several capitals across the world. And there are a lot of questions that people would want to understand. So I thought perhaps two long-serving diplomats would be the ideal people for answering this question. So let me come to you, Ambassador Sajjanhar, first. First of all, what is this multi-party delegation all about?
Thank you very much, Swasti, for having me on your program. You know, these multi-party delegations, because the experience of the government and I think also of the think tanks community seems to have been that possibly there is less than adequate understanding and appreciation of what India is talking about. So I think I can say from my personal experience, because I was outside and I was talking to a large cross section of people in different countries, and there seems to be that impression that this is something between India and Pakistan on the Kashmir issue, and Kashmir has always been an issue, so there should not be any conflict, and there should not be a long-term continuation of the fighting between the two countries. So we saw what was the reaction of the world as far as Pahalgam on the 22nd April. You saw all major powers, the leaders, prime ministers, presidents, etc., calling the prime minister, the foreign ministers calling their counterpart here, and conveying both condolences and also that India has full right to act against the perpetrators of terrorism. But when the 7th May happened, then it was that, okay, there's in Kashmir and there's the Kashmir issue, so we need to tamp down on this.
Okay.
So I think basically the delegations have gone out in the world to tell them that this is a fight against terrorism, and that the whole world has really to get together as far as pushback against terrorism is concerned. And it is not only India's fight. Number two, I think this also sends out a very clear message, because what the perpetrators of the terrorist attacks on the 22nd of April, what they wanted to do is basically to sow communal discord in the country. That there would be only Hindus were killed and their religion was identified, and then they were killed. So the idea was that there might be disturbances, communal disturbances within the country. I think the country stayed united. And here, by sending out multi-party delegations, from the government, from the opposition, it also sends out a message that the country stands united. The country stands as one in terms of dealing with the scourge of terrorism.
So if I understand correctly, I think the point is that the fight against terrorism is not something which is exclusive to India, and India
Indeed.
wants to sort of convey this. But coming to you, Ambassador Bisaria, one also wonders then that what purpose does a multi-party delegation hold here? Because we already have a parliamentary committee on foreign affairs as well. So if you could just shed some light on how these elections have been made, and for example, are they also well versed then with the geopolitics, or for example, counter-terrorism? And if so, then you don't really see the counter-terror experts. So these are the questions that probably everybody is tackling with, that you have a set of parliamentarians and supported by some retired ambassadors, of course. So in your opinion, how does this combination work?
Right. So, I would first agree with everything that Ambassador Sajjanhar has said, that, the purpose is, one, to get the focus on terrorism, to get the international focus on terrorism. It should be a sort of post 9/11 moment when the global focus was on terrorism. And that's what we want to say. This is what it's about. It's about terrorism. Secondly, it's about telling the world about the new normal that India has defined about dealing with this terrorism, and which we saw in operation when we saw Operation Sindoor. And of course, it is also about countering Pakistan's propaganda, because here we have a country which feels it had the power or the opportunity of the first lie, and has spun a web of propaganda which it is unleashing on the world, and many gullible folks might believe it. So it's also important to counter that propaganda. To your question on how we choose the delegations and what it is a diplomatic innovation. Because, as you said, there are some former diplomats supporting the parliamentarians, and this whole delegation is supporting India's traditional diplomatic effort, because we have resident ambassadors everywhere. They are having the conversations, and if I or Ambassador Sajjanhar was a head of mission in one of the countries where they came, we would welcome that, because it helps you amplify your effort. It helps you open doors which you may not have opened in the recent past, meeting parliamentarians, meeting opinion shakers, opinion makers, and so on. So it all helps. And the messaging is also, to an extent, a domestic one, that, we are united at this moment. This is a multi-party, multi-faith delegation, in the face of an attempt which was an attempt to divide us in some ways. So I think the messaging is good. It is a diplomatic innovation, and it will reinforce that message. It will say all of these things, and it will also be an opportunity for other conversations, talking about the India growth story, for instance. So, it is a part of diplomacy. It helps intensify that diplomacy.
So in that sense, it's also somewhere trying to sort of, address these larger issues about India. I mean, this alleged rehyphenation that India has found itself in with respect to getting connected to Pakistan, and then again trying to dehyphenate and focus more on the India story, etc. But just Ambassador Sajjanhar, so I mean, I'd just like to have your views on this particular issue, because I think it's something which would require a bit of clarity. So when you look at the list, there are about 7 of such groups that have been dispatched, and out of those groups, if you see, there are the bigger partners. Of course, there's United States, and there's Russia, and there's a lot of countries from Europe, etc., from the Middle East. But also then you see very small countries like Congo, like Liberia, like Sierra Leone, etc. So why do you think these countries feature in that particular list? Is it got to do something with more multilateral institutions here?
Yes, and to a very significant extent, Swasti. But before I come to that, if I could, I think you will come to that issue a little later. That has this led to rehyphenation of India and Pakistan, and I am convinced. I am of a very strong view that rehyphenation is out of the question. India has so far outpaced Pakistan in every sense of the word that this no one can talk about rehyphenation. Hyphenation really finished. Let's put it in March 2000 when Bill Clinton came to India. He spent 5 days here, going to 4 cities. On his way back, he stopped at Karachi airport to give a televised address to the Pakistani people, generally telling them, don't engage in terrorism. So, we have traveled much further. Pakistan has gone down, India has risen. Today, we are the fourth largest economy. There's no single, challenge globally that can be resolved without the active participation and engagement of India. So, rehyphenation out of the question. But coming to a question that you asked in terms of why these small countries, many of these small countries are members of the United Nations Security Council. Either they are, all these non-permanent members will be there for 2 years. So those who are going to be members in 2025, in 2026, and 2027. So these 3 years are going to be very important. Pakistan is a non-permanent member this year, so I think that, of course, no delegation is going. No delegation is going to China. But all the others, those who are going to be, that is a big grouping. And also, as far as West Asia is concerned, also the permanent members of the Security Council, four of them, that they are being advanced. And if I could also respond to, you said, meaning, do these the members of the delegation, do they have a good feel of foreign policy, global, international affairs?
Yeah, one wonders because I
Yeah.
mean, not all parliamentarians are tasked with the
Yes.
with conveying India's foreign policy pursuits. That's pretty much a specialized domain in itself. Yeah, but so please continue.
Because that is one comment that you made. And I think we have, as far as the chair of these, the leaders of these delegations, there are people like Shashi Tharoor,
Of
there are people
course.
like Baijan Panda, but
Yes.
even as members of the delegation, there are people like Manish Tiwari. There are so many of them, and they have all been briefed by, by the foreign secretary, and they have been participating in all these debates. And India's security, they're all articulate. Mr. Owaisi, very articulate, and Ms. Kanimodi, who's going to be leading another delegation. So all of them, I think, are very well equipped. And basically, the idea is to send out people's representatives. So they will reach out to their own counterparts in different parliaments. They will reach out to think tanks. They will reach out to the governments. They will reach out to the media. So across the board, they are going to be speaking to them. And the reports that have been coming in, we have seen that they have had very successful interactions in terms of being able to tell them, sensitize them on what India's position is. Because India is also taking many new initiatives going forward. So I think we need the support of the global community and an understanding of the global community as to where we are coming from and where we wish to go.
So what you mean to say is that so there is definitely more nuance to it than perhaps what is being discussed right now. So it needs to be sort of looked upon in a larger picture. And Ambassador Bisaria, let me just now bring your. I mean, I would like to have your views on this thing that while the Operation Sindoor was on, it kind of felt bad to us that we could not even delay the IMF loan, the bailout package to Pakistan to the tune of $1 billion. So it just looked as if the international community is having this very tone deaf response to a victim that is fighting terror on its soil, and then you really sort of somewhere, reinforce some kind of a legitimacy for the aggressor by allowing them to have a bailout package. So do you think, first, your views on that, and then do you think this kind of multi-party delegations could also try and have a more meaningful conversations with the IMF, for instance?
Yes, so, first to just reinforce the point that Ambassador Sajjanhar made, that, all these delegations will speak with the diversity of India. There'll be different nuances, there'll be different emphases based upon their perceptions. While what happens in Pakistan is that you have a set of talking points given by Rawalpindi, and everyone is regurgitating those talking points. False flag operation by the Indians, and we downed so many aircraft, and we won the battle.
By the way, let me just tell everybody that he was our High Commissioner to Pakistan. So obviously, you know Pakistan
Yes.
really well in the Pinty conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, this is part of the calculation that you speak with the authenticity and the diversity of India's multiple voices. But, on your other question on the IMF, again, diplomacy is not a one day sport, right? It was terrible optics by the IMF. If I was having that conversation with the IMF, I would tell them it's a bad decision in the middle of a war. Postpone it.
At least postpone it, at least delay it.
Don't
at
do it
least.
immediately.
Yeah.
But the larger point remains that this is where our diplomacy is anyway going. We have been telling the IMF that we want FATF like conditions baked into the IMF programs.
Right.
Which means that there ought to be clauses on terrorism. When you're talking of structural adjustment, we should be talking about the role of the army, which supports terrorism in the economy of Pakistan. So all these issues we are taking up, and this will be the next phase of our diplomacy. Now, whether the delegation going to the United States, Shashi Tharoor, who comes from the whole ecosystem of the United Nations, does have meetings with the World Bank and the IMF, and also sensitizes them to Indian concerns, that would be welcome. But in any case, whether or not they meet them, this is the way our diplomacy is going, telling the World Bank, telling the IMF, telling the FATF that this is the Pakistan you're dealing with, bake in very strong conditions for the loans that you would give. And I think this is be the sort of diplomacy India will do, and India's voice counts in a lot of these fora. Even in the IMF, there are multiple nuances there. While the loan, which was part of a package given sanctioned last year, the next tranche may have been given, newer, tougher conditions might come in, have come in, and will come in.
There is a conversation on that.
So this is an ongoing conversation. You don't have a headline immediately, but you do have these conversations. Putting Pakistan in the grey list of the FATF, that will be a sort of goal as well for India and many like-minded countries.
Right. And how do we understand this without discussing China? And for that, of course, I'll come to Ambassador Sajjanhar. So, of course, we didn't send the delegation, any of these delegations, these groupings, they did not go to China. We did see that, while the operation was on, we did see that China and Turkey came out in, I would say, in a very unambiguous support for Pakistan, whether it was military, diplomatic, etc. More military, actually, than anything else. So how does, especially when we're talking about these multilateral efforts, okay, and you have a China with all its economic might and outreach and the economic statecraft that China also deploys, how much do you see the China factor playing in?
I think China factor is a very important factor in this whole equation, because, and it's not only the economic might, it's also the military might. Huge, in terms of technology, in terms of high-end, weaponry and equipment. And that's what you saw. As far as Pakistan is concerned, more than 80%, that's what, according to the SIPRI estimate, more than 80% of the weaponry of Pakistan today is of Chinese origin. It used to be earlier from America, but right now, slowly and gradually over the last decades or so, it has shifted completely really over to China. And so I think it is also, China also wants to try out whether it's, it's AVAC systems, it's aircrafts, etc. So I think China and Turkey will continue to play a very important role as far as our relations with Pakistan are concerned going forward. And that is why you would see, I think it would have come as quite a bit of a shock as far as China is concerned, because none of the missiles that China sent to us, none of its long range weapons, drones, etc., they were able to penetrate our air defense coverage. What we were able to, they sent it for our military establishments, for civilians, for religious, buildings, but they were not able to harm, not have much of an impact as far as India is concerned. We were able to block all that they sent. On the other hand, whether it was on the 7th morning, hitting out at all these 9 terror hideouts and strongholds and all. And they knew that something is going to happen because India had been telling them, meaning the whole country had been saying that, we want a retribution, we want a response to Pahalgam. And the Prime Minister had said that in so many words that this is not going to go unresponded. They knew that these attacks were coming. They were not able to stop even one of them. So what did their radar systems and their AVACs, how did they help out? And all of them were of Chinese origin. So it has not stood them in good stead. Also on the 10th morning, all these 13 airfields that were completely pulverized and devastated, they couldn't do anything. And that is why you see that on the first day after the so-called cessation of hostilities, you have Ishaq Dar, the deputy prime minister. He makes his way to China, basically asking for more lethal weaponry and more sort of, getting themselves more primed up for future. So I think what we are going to see, and there are all these reports that China might be supplying, the fifth generation aircraft, the stealth aircraft to Pakistan. India will have to get ready. We've had a phenomenal success this time, but we also have to keep on upgrading our capabilities, our training, our, in every sense of the word, so that we don't, we maintain, number one, this edge, and number one, we are able to control the escalation ladder going forward.
So my sense of asking this question on China was more to do with the fact that with China's economic might and the heft that it carries, especially also with a lot of countries that are labeled global south, quote unquote. I was asking in terms of what success should India expect, or what degree can we go forward in terms of progress when we talk about these conversations at IMF, or for example at the United Nations Security Council, because you have a permanent member that is an all-weather ally to Pakistan. So my question was also, more. To you, that question was more so that you could reflect on that China factor in terms of India's outreach of these multi-party delegations. So, do you think China playing a role there? At the FATF, when we want to punish Pakistan there, when we want Pakistan, the IMF to delay the loans to Pakistan, how do you think China can sort of
No, absolutely.
destabilize these efforts from India?
I think China will definitely have a very important role to play. We saw, even as far as the UN Security Council is concerned, the discussions that took place on the 25th of April. And Pakistan tried to remove the TRF from, making any reference to the resistance front, which had claimed responsibility on two occasions, then went back on it. So China played a role because Pakistan didn't want TRF to be mentioned, and China played a role. So let me also put it this way, Pakistan is going to be the chair of the Security Council in July. So I think we need to be ready for that also. And China and Pakistan are going to act in tandem for this, and also in the FATF. I think that has always been the challenge. This is not a new challenge as far as China is concerned, because, they have been iron brothers and higher than the mountains and deeper or sweeter than the honey, whatever it is. They have been all, these two countries have always been that.
All exotic diplomatic recipes, we can talk about.
No, extra diplomatic. I don't think these are diplomatic terminology.
Coming from a diplomat, yes, that's a new diplomatic lingo.
Yeah,
I'll note it down.
I don't think you hear about this in any other conversations about any other relationships, only this. So I think that is going to continue. That has been going there for a long time. You look at, Masood Azhar, 2009, the first request to the 1267 committee, it started. China put on technical holds 4 times. It was only after 10 years that we were able to get the technical hold removed. And I don't want to go into the details of that. But the China challenge will continue to be there. And we have to, I think we have strong support when we are talking about dealing with global terrorism. Because you look at it, even when Prime Minister went to Washington, D.C. On 13th of February, the joint declaration contains all references to dealing with cross-border terrorism, fighting, LET, Jaish, Hizbul, Bombay attacks 26/11, Pathankot. It has references to all these. And we have these references in all are joint declarations with our strategic partners like France, like Germany, like UK.
Japan,
So
everywhere.
Japan,
Yeah.
all of them are, there with us. So I think we have a strong measure of support across the globe. And I think that is why we'll really be able to take forward our narrative when we go to the FATF, when we go to the World Bank, when we try to go to the when we go to the 1267 committee to put the resistance front also as one of the designated terrorist groups. I think definitely we will have support from those quarters.
So, well, I mean, coming to you again, Ambassador Sajjanhar. So, how do you think all this kind of plays into the larger, broader strategy that India must have in countering terrorism from Pakistan and also isolating Pakistan in the long term? Because it has to have a multi-pronged approach. So, how does all this measure up, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's a very fascinating question, because I think also related to this is that India has been maintaining that it has strategic autonomy in terms of taking action against any terrorist attacks that take place, and also reaching out to the world. So I think, in my view, there is no contradiction between these two. I think India this time also, Swasti, has demonstrated beyond any doubt that to protect the welfare of its citizens, of its people, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, it will do what it needs to do without waiting for a nod from any country, any power. And that is what we have demonstrated at time of our own choosing, place of our own choosing. We have taken action both on the 7th morning as also on the 10th morning. So I think India will continue with this policy, but when our game is not only bilateral, our game is also global. When we have to sort of go to the FATF, when I have to go to the UN Security Council to tell them, then we need the support of all these. And it is important to inform them as to what is involved, that India is fighting a battle, India is fighting a war, not only for itself, but it's fighting a war for the world. It's a war against terrorism. And the scourge of terrorism impacts all of us, affects all of us. So we need to be together in fighting this. And I think the world knows about it, because, in many of these discussions on terrorism, and, wherever terrorist attacks take place, whether it is 9/11 or the London tube attacks in 2007, or any of the attacks that have taken place in India, or it is Bali, or it is Madrid, or you name it, all of them are connected in some way or the other with Pakistan. And also you find that there are so many, whether it is Osama bin Laden, he was found there. The world knows who were the perpetrators of the 26/11 attacks. So I think the footprint of Pakistan on terrorist attacks around the world, that is very well known. And this is basically to underline, emphasize all these aspects, and to exhort the world community, global community, that we need to work together in dealing with this.
So, Ambassador Bisaria, but there's more. I feel there's more to the China factor because, of course, China calls itself an all-weather ally to Pakistan, and of course, Ambassador Sajjanhar also alluded to a few points. But then, in your point, would you like to give a little bit more elaboration to it?
Yes, so I think one important strategic point to remember is that this India Pakistan conflict was perhaps the most serious ever in nuclear times since 98, because we climbed a couple of extra rungs of the escalation ladder. If you compare it with even 99, when in Kargil, that was done in a kind of strategic atmosphere of strategic restraint by India. We will not cross the line of control. But even 2019 was one strike and one retort from Pakistan, but we didn't climb that much. Now, the interesting thing about this battlefield, which was a high-tech battlefield, was also it was a collusive battlefield. That 80% Chinese equipment, that in a military sense, the collusion was already here. And this is the battlefield of the future, which will get in the Chinese in any battlefield situation with the Pakistanis. But apart from that, you referred to the diplomatic cover that Pakistan gets from China. All through its journey of trying to defend its terrorists, China gives the diplomatic cover. We saw that in 2019 when Masood Azhar's diplomatic, his listing was delayed by a technical hold by China and finally released only on the 1st of May when China felt it was expending too much diplomatic capital on terrorism and on Pakistan. So, this diplomatic collusion and military collusion is here to stay. So, both India's diplomacy and India's military strategies will have to factor in the fact that we are already in a collusive kind of strategic atmosphere. We don't have to wait for that two front war. That unified front is already here. So I think that is the big message we get, but also the message that despite that unified front, the Chinese equipment failed, both in their defensive capacity and their offensive capacity. So I suspect when Ishaq Dar goes there, he says, please, sir, your equipment failed. This was bad Chinese mal. So please give us better Chinese equipment so that next time we can do some defense and do some offense, which doesn't fall flat. So I think, and I'm sure you'll have the new field marshal soon hot-foot it out to China to ask them for more equipment and more cover and also more help for the economy because the IMF screws are likely to turn. So the what began as a strategic partnership between Pakistan and China is a relationship of abject dependence for military, for economic, for diplomatic cover.
Actually, Ambassador Bisaria, so that's the whole point. So what happens with China, and especially in terms of the military equipment, is that because they've never really been battle tested. So what the Chinese are up to is that they are also using this experience as a way of learning, so that they can improve upon their weapons, and that is what actually worries a lot of military buffs. It's so the first time performance might fail. Like the Turkish weapons have been tested already, but the Chinese weapons have not. But so you're right that this is going to stay, and this so-called all-weather
Absolutely.
allies
And
are
the battle
going to
testing
stick.
will stay
Yes,
because this is a
yes,
cheap
yeah.
way of testing your
That's right.
equipment
Yeah, that's right.
in battlefield
Yeah.
conditions.
I mean, we have seen how so many countries like France and Japan and the US have asked for the remnant of the PL-15E missile that we shot down, which is Chinese, just in order to understand how the Chinese equipment work. But yes, I mean, that's for another day. And of course, you mentioned the new field marshal. We probably need a new discussion, I mean, a separate discussion on how the Pakistani generals have been promoting themselves. So that's quite intriguing as well. But coming back to the main topic that we're discussing for today, I also like to just understand from you. You're a career diplomat, and you've served at these key positions. At least in the last few years, there has been this understanding, and I think across the board understanding, that multilateralism has not really been able to deliver. So we are living in times where there is a crisis of multilateralism. I mean, the external affairs ministers has gone around saying so many times that these are times where plurilaterals work better. They are more nimble, and they're perhaps better at addressing the issues. Multilateralism doesn't work. But yet, when we have a problem like this, we see that we are trying to make this outreach to multilateral institutions. So how should the layperson understand this? If there is a crisis of multilateralism, is multilateralism dead, or can it be revived?
Right. I think it's a great question because, it is important to understand the nuance.
Yeah.
Because what we are saying is multilateralism is not serving the needs of the times. It was invented in 1945. It was many of the institutions were answering the needs of 1945, and this has changed. So what India is not saying gut multilateralism, which is sometimes what Trump says.
Yeah.
But Trump is also a temporary United States phenomenon. He's not going to be there forever. So not gut multilateralism, but reform multilateralism, which is what India says, that what we need is reform multilateralism, as you move from one order to the other. But while we are in this world with this inadequate and flawed multilateralism, we are not saying we will ignore it and do what we have to. We will also engage with it. So you're engaging with those multilateral institutions because the UN might be a bad show, but it's the only show in town. So globally, we will keep engaging with the United Nations simply because this is it is a platform that is available to us. But I think the way to look at it is there are two separate conversations. One, we explain our point of view to the multilateral system, and the second, we work on reforming this multilateral system and changing its complexion to have India's voice better showcased and to make it react to the realities of the world today.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the Trump factor because, Trump theatrics is something which is anyway giving sleepless nights to many capitals, perhaps ours as well. But I mean, if I just want to understand from you, how do you look at this bigger picture emerging that you have a Donald Trump in the White House that is just so desperate to take credit for anything and everything, including the so-called ceasefire that he brokered, that we had to go on record rectifying several times that it is a bilateral thing. But so Donald Trump on the one hand, and then you have China on the other hand. You also have a very complex, warfare era where disinformation, misinformation, everything plays out. So how do you sort of, in your sense, what do you suggest to the Indian decision maker, for example, the strategic community? What should be our long-term strategy to counter Pakistani narrative on the one hand, to have our word explicitly loud and clear on terror, and then also protecting our self-interests in terms of our economic interests, etc.
Right. So I think the central message there is we are on our own in a battlefield, right? If we have to fight our battles, you fight your battles on your own.
Yeah.
But the major powers are behaving in unpredictable ways, and that is also a given.
Yeah.
So we have to accept that these major powers will behave in unpredictable ways, and particularly the United States under Trump, because what we're seeing with 4 months of Trump is really a revolution. And Trump has turned on his own country and the enemies within and his allies and partners first before he addresses his adversaries.
Yeah.
And and on this particular Saturday he needed an easy win because he wasn't anywhere close to the Gaza ceasefire or the Ukraine ceasefire.
That's right.
So
yeah.
he grabbed the low hanging fruit of the Indian ceasefire and said, let me take full credit. So but I would say that we shouldn't be particularly perturbed by this for policymakers. It's bad optics, bad public diplomacy by the United States if if part of the objective is to engage India in some kind of and do some public diplomacy vis-a-vis India. But in a larger sense, this is consistent with Trump's behavior. It doesn't move the needle on too many things.
Yeah.
For instance, what Trump delivered on in that period was a triple whammy.
Yeah.
He said, one, I did the ceasefire. Two, I used tariffs and trade, and I'm getting zero tariffs from the Indians.
Yeah.
Three, his claim was, I'm getting Apple to get out of India.
Of course,
And
yeah.
I'm
And
putting
then he
a tariff-
repeated that also.
and exactly.
Yeah, he repeated that
So
recently. Yeah.
it's not great optics,
Yeah.
but will the situation on the ground change as much as Trump is claiming? Perhaps not.
Perhaps not.
Perhaps Apple's the tariffs will be reversed because it doesn't make too much economic sense.
Right.
The logic of the India United States trade agreement is going on a separate dynamic, and there'll be some give, there'll be some take, there'll be some zero to zero tariff lines, there'll be some others where India will protect their interests. And but Trump wants to demonstrate to his domestic audience that he's got a win. So he's the deal maker, he's the peacemaker. So when he gets both on a Saturday, he grabs them and says, I've done the deal, I've done the peace.
So just the other, I mean, because we are discussing about Donald Trump and his desperation to sort of take credit, I think the only thing he requires, and for the world's sanity to prevail, I think we should really give him the Nobel Prize, because that's what he really requires, right?
Yes,
In order to
I
calm
think that'll
down.
be
He needs to calm down.
that'll be sort of strategic pragmatism.
Yes.
Because if you say you don't want so much volatility, maybe the aim of that volatility is the Nobel Prize. So let's give it early in the game. And there's a precedent. The
Yes.
world gave Obama a Nobel Prize in the beginning of his term. to ensure that he behaves in a certain way. So maybe that is what is required here.
Well, on that note, I have to thank the two of you for taking the time out and having this brilliant discussion on how to make sense of these multi-party delegations and India's communication strategies now with respect to its war on terror. Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you, Swasti.